Morning, Vivek. Please, All right, you are Yogesh Dilhor. Great. Please tell us something about yourself.
So my father was in the armed forces. He was born in Fatehabad as a result, and being all over the country, Dehradun, Pathankot, Ambala, Agra, Chandigarh. In 2011, I got into National School, Bangalore. 16, I graduated. Then I worked for a bit in ICICI corporate legal. Then I worked for another year with another consultancy. And since 2018, I've been preparing for cases.
Why UPSC? Why not anything else?
So 3 reasons, sir. So first was the induction, sir. I had a brilliant teacher in Mrs. Rakhi Saxena, who guided me towards it, who sort of planted the seeds. Then, sir, while I was doing my consultancy work in 2018, I met a gentleman by the name of Mr. Pushpendra Rajput, who was the CEO of Himachal, the Chief Electoral Officer. And he was the smartest person in the room, the last to speak, the calmest. He understood the value of time-making decision. And I got inspired. And then, sir, there's a generalist orientation because I'm from National School. We're taught in a lot of subjects and we're taught to solve problems, to find innovation in the cross currents of sections. So that's why I said I was always interested in the civil services and using my problem solving approach.
Which law school is it?
It's a National School, Bangalore.
Bangalore, and one we have one at Hyderabad.
Yes, sir, we have more than 11 also.
Bangalore is the best one.
Bangalore is
Yeah, it's the best one.
You see, I have a question. You see, what happens is when you get into the services, today, of course, the compensation system is much better. But the compensation system has become enormously better in the corporates, which is what Kanchima probably had in mind asking you as to why you not inclined there and you inclined here, because you would be, in terms of compensation, you would be in a different place.
Yes, sir. In fact, so my consultancy deep rate gave me a substantial amount more than what I would earn in the service services. So there are 3 reasons why I think that's not the right for me. So one is the service ethic that my father brought into me, which I've always assumed to be the case, sir, that you are born to serve. The timing, the circumstances don't matter. And service also does not remunerate as much, but service is the essence. Second, sir, I've always enjoyed my interaction with people. I have considered people as the primary subject of my research, sir, since college days. That reflects in my hobbies, that reflects in my interests, and that reflects in the kinds of jobs that I have. So even if I get paid a little less, I think I'll gain a lot more in terms of my interaction with people. So those are the 2 reasons.
Actually, everyone serves. A mason or a laborer also serves. And the kind of people skill and people interaction which they have is far more, than anybody else, even in your kind of service. That is okay. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to ask you one thing. You have also served in the private sector and the government sector. The government is going towards privatization. Even in the services and all, you must have seen that the past trend has been to privatize most of the sector. What is your take on that? Do you think private sector is a better sector, and what they are saying that government has no business to be in the government?
I've trained myself to think beyond this private government binary. Because it enables better understanding of what the government is trying to do now. Article 38 clearly directs the government to provide services. We are a welfare state. And the end is an efficient delivery of basic services. Now, while the government does that in conjunction with the private sector, or if the government does that on its own, or it leases those services out to the private sector, the end is that those services should be available to people. And I think the government should modulate itself depending on the services that are being provided and depending on the manner in which they should be provided. So now the end matters, not the means.
The point is, what I'm trying to ask is, do you think that the private sector, the basic motto of the private sector is profit? Any of the private sector, do you think they'll be able to provide as you said, we are a welfare state, we are not a police state. So, do you think that they will be able to provide that level of welfare services to the people as government sector would have provided?
I've also thought about it and I've failed to come to a blanket answer for this question, ma'am. Ma'am, in Indian context, I think it depends on the sector more than an overall answer, ma'am. For example, ma'am, whenever there is service delivery to the last person concerned, for example, in backward areas, to the marginalized sections or women, it's more important to have government regulating private businesses, more important. And other situations where there is service delivery to a relatively richer sections, for example, urban intelligence, urban people in areas, then I think that the government should allow private sector to move towards efficiency, even if that comes with a profit motive, because the urban people are generally assumed to be much better off in terms of their education levels and can assert their rights if they are reshaped by the private sector.
So your take is it should be on the economic criteria. They should be. Second question, you know about the lateral entry system. Recently, we are going for the lateral entry. You being aspirant from UPSC and you know how much hard work it takes, like loads of hard work. So do you think it's justified for to put in the lateral entry where people come across from different sector and to bypass the examination system? What is your take on that?
Ma'am, the bureaucracy that has taken India through the last 75 years would not look the same as the bureaucracy that will take India through the next 75 years. Ma'am, there are certain sectors that require specialization as a characteristic. For example, privatization of space. For example, trade negotiations with world countries. For example, ma'am, a particular instance has been the delivery of BharatNet networks.
So you mean technocrats is okay? Introduction of lateral entry of technocrats at that level, at that secretary level, I think. That is okay, but others should not be there. Yes,
If you say technocrats, it means specialists.
Generalist specialist controversy.
Generalist
That controversy has been
How
going
do
on
you
for
take on
ages.
that? How do you think?
I have one more question. Did you get to read the Subarrow's article in the editorial a couple of days ago? He commented, he wrote about the services.
Sorry, sir. I did read it, sir, but I don't recall its premises.
See, it was about the ethics of the services. And
Government say related, let me ask you something. You see, we inherited governability from the British. Great systems. Even that, commissioner revenue system, even now they are running most of them. The ideal and the best governability system inherited from the British. Yet, our governance is considered very poor. What is the basic reason?
May I correct my thoughts on this?
Say again.
Please take your time.
Yeah.
Okay.
fine.
Welcome. Take your own time. There is nothing. No, what I mean is there something wrong with our bureaucracy? Something wrong with our political systems? Or the law and the balance between the executive and is there some problem somewhere?
So there are three reasons that I can think of why we might not do as well as our Western counterparts on many indicators, or many development indicators. I guess that's a proxy for governance. So one is that there is society in transition, sir. So when in 1947, when we started drafting our own constitution, the document was supposed to bring about a social and political revolution. It was not just a system-driven approach, it was also changing the people's beliefs and ideas. So that change in beliefs and ideas is still taking place. So what we in political theory call a society in transition, basically, so a society going through a prism. And that's why I think there are some contradictions inherent in the structures. For example, a modern legal system, which is juxtaposed over people who often hold medieval values. So, sir, with time, we will see that people will also democratize. People will also start.
Okay, but tell me, is democracy an impediment to real growth, the kind of growth which India needed? And in 47, should we have some kind of guided democracy rather than the full democracy which we chose to have?
So, democracy is not just a means value, sir. Democracy is also an ends value. There's no development via democracy, sir. There is development of democracy also. So, it was India's democracy that ensured that we didn't have famines after 1950, which China and many African countries had, sir. It was democracy, so that allowed India to stay together and function as a coherent unit. For example, the Yugoslavia was not allowed able to do so. So it was democracy that allowed India to go from a very Nehruvian Soviet system of governance.
Okay, recently happiness index report was out, and which country topped the index for 5 straight years?
Sir, if I'm not wrong, sir, it was Bhutan, sir.
No, it was not. Bhutan has fared quite badly this time. It is ranked in 90s.
Alright.
So it's a Scandinavian country. Would you like to make an educated guess?
Sir, from the metrics, I think it was Finland.
Finland. And how did India fare in that index?
Sir, I don't
Below
know.
Pakistan or above Pakistan?
Sir, definitely below Pakistan.
Below Pakistan?
It was ranked 136. So can you define happiness? What happiness means to you?
Sir, thought about it, sir. I think for me, sir, it's Aristotelian concept of eudaimonia, sir, which he explains as, because sir, I've tried other things also,
Okay.
but in the end, I've centered around this, sir. So I've always set targets, objectives that I can achieve. They should be difficult to achieve. Then I achieve them, and then I feel satisfied, fulfilled.
And what is success? What is success then, according to you?
So, if I could just revisit the definition, sir, that is what I thought was happiness, sir. But I always found that an element of service should have been included in what I thought to be happiness. So, whenever I was doing something for others, whenever someone looked at me with a smile, I thought I've done well and it brought me happiness. So, success, on the other hand, sir, for Ukrainians, it could be repelling a Russian attack, but it won't really mean happiness, sir. So, success is short term. Can be short term. Success is mechanical.
Let me share with you Steve Jobs' definition of success. He always used to say, success is when you find what you love. Everything else,
The second one.
second,
Yogesh, I have a question. Sorry if you have
please.
I have a question for you. We do hope and wish that you get into the service soon. What, and you will obviously be starting at the district level, deputy to the commissioner, deputy commissioner, I don't know about the hierarchies, but now, what is the great difference, innovative difference you would like to make and convince your boss about the development you would like to make in your area?
Foundational literacy, sir.
Basic literacy.
Yes, sir.
Primary education, basically.
A specific kind of primary education, sir. The kind of pedagogy that I think even the national education policy sort of ignores.
20,
Yes, sir,
20,
20. In the field of linguistics, sir, if I could take a minute more, sir, to explain this, sir. When Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas, his wife, Hillary Clinton, started a project called the Arkansas Project. It used the
What is the name?
Arkansas Project, based on the name of the state in which he was the governor, sir. So it used up all the lessons from the newly minted field of neurolinguistics, sir. Lessons of first language acquisition, second language acquisition, and they came up with some interesting ideas of how to ensure that students grow up to be very smart and educated people. So I think those ideas have remained very widely spread in the Western pedagogy. But I think they haven't really percolated through India. So the National Education Policy 2020 tries to make a dent and comes up with the right concept of foundational literacy, and which hypothesizes that if a student by the age of 4 or 5 is competent in numeracy and literacy, can understand a simple sentence, can absorb sentences and stories, and can do basic mathematics, later on in his life he is more likely to do well in his regular studies. But I think, sir, the National Education Policy should have gone a mile further, sir. For example, sir, there are experiments going on in Europe and West, sir, saying that if you read to a child who's even 6 months old, he is more likely to do well or earn more, sir, later in his life. A confirmation that came from the Arkansas Project in the US, sir. If you teach a child a music instrument, he is more likely to do well in his studies later on in life. If you teach a child simple games like chess or checkers, he is more likely to develop a higher IQ later on in his life. And those simple lessons, which are cost efficient, which do not really require a lot of maintenance at highest levels, are being ignored. And I think that's an intervention that I could make as I carry some expertise in that area.
They say that even when the child is in the room
Yeah.
playing music and all, you see, real input to the child starts even when the child is in the room, when you are coming.
Another
It's never took off after that. Because, no, even I would agree that you see what happens is that when you talk to the child, the mother talks to the child, and that's the stage, the child can start to absorb, and there are empirical
Yes, sir.
evidence.
Sir, I would like to have your views on the, do you think that UN have become different like League of Nations? Because if you check the past scenario, there have been many countries and the main role of UN having to maintain peace and stability, they have a UN peacekeeping force. And during Corona crisis also, the World Organization as a whole, that would be my question, that multilateral organization that are losing its significance and hold. And bilateral is coming up, just like we have Russia and China, their own mutual interests. So what would you suggest, that UN is still there, or we need a better organization, or we need some changing in the structure of UN? Do we have to increase permanent members? Please give your take on that.
No, I think there is two questions, ma'am. Whether UN has become irrelevant, and two, whether we need a change. On the relevance of United Nations, ma'am, and there is no one United Nations, ma'am. There are at least three United Nations. One is the Security Council, which underlines the power structure, and that is somewhat, let's say, paralyzed. Ma'am. That's primarily because it underscores a post-Second World War world order, and a rift directly in the middle of those powers, China and Russia on one side, and US, UK, and France on the other side, is going to paralyze any security atmosphere. Two, ma'am, the General Assembly. Now, the General Assembly, I think, continues to be one of the most powerful inventions of mankind ever. It is the code of world opinion, and a resolution in General Assembly may not mean much in terms of military force, but it means a lot in terms of from a constructivist approach to international relations. Most of the international standards, be it shipping, be it whaling, be it the climate change, be it standard setting in communications, United Nations continues to be the most important standard setting organization of our times, besides being the court of world opinion. And ma'am, the third United Nations is the NGOs and the civil society, which, ma'am, continues to be the most important voice. For example, in the Ukraine conflict also, ma'am, we saw they are driving the agenda. So, ma'am, yes, ma'am.
Are they driving the agenda? Who's driving the agenda? UN?
No,
NGOs.
No, but why is it called toothless? UN is, you see, I was asked by somebody, some publisher, to write a book on international relations. So I go through the UN charter right from the beginning and the entire thing. I too feel that it is toothless in its present form. What do you say?
So, Hamashpur, the first Secretary General, said he argued that the purpose of the United Nations is not to bring world peace, it's just to ensure that this jungle turns into
We should change the, whatever was the objective at that time. That time world peace was one of the major objectives, isn't it? So that means it is no more relevant.
No, sir. So I would argue that so the relevancy, the parameters of relevancy have also changed. Now, sir, why is it called toothless? It's also, and sir, to confirm that argument, sir, it is relatively powerless. But that's only the Security Council, only when the big powers are involved or when the conflict is in the heart of Europe. For example, sir, there are more than 70 peacekeeping operations going on in Africa right now. So there are Indian forces that are engaged all over the world. So, and so there's an estimate that's argued that whatever Security Council operations are performed under the UN banner are at a 1/10 of cost of any Western major military powers. Further, sir, the reason why it's called toothless is because of its failure to perform Chapter 7 obligations or Chapter 6 obligations. However, sir, what happens now is Chapter 6.5 obligations, so where there are peacekeeping forces. So, sir, I understand that a conflict.
Can you differentiate quantum supremacy with the term quantum winter?
No, sir. So I do have an idea, but
Like Indian budget had announced a Quest program. Can you highlight what Quest program is about?
May I be allowed to take a guess?
You can take your guess.
So the Quest program tries to ensure the development of quantum supercomputing power in the country, sir, because we don't have any right now. And because of the decrypting powers that a supercomputer, that a quantum computer brings, Indian government thought it necessary that we should develop
differentiate hectocon and decacon in startup culture? These terms are in vogue.
No, sir. I have not.
What is your strength and weakness as an individual?
So my first strength, I think, is my ability to absorb a lot of information and make 2 to 3 important points out of it. It's just something I learned in college. So I think my second strength is that I'm approachable to everyone. When I led a team at my job, so, anyone could call me at any time, and I would always ensure that I'm available to people who I was working with. And third, sir,
You come to the weakness, strengths are quite one we are already.
sir, there have been weaknesses, sir, that I've tried to work on. So, for example, sir, at one of my job deals, what happened was someone who was working with me, made a giant blunder, and as a result, there was a lot of issue in the media about that. And I was less than kind to the individual. And later, then I realized that it was a problem at my end because information flow was not to the answer. So I apologized. And then I started this tradition that no matter what job you have to do that day, the first meeting has to be here.
Wait.
That's
Ability
not
to say
that's not a
sorry.
weakness.
That is
That's a virtue.
See, the ability to say sorry requires so much of courage that you don't need it for a stupid man.
Absolutely.
You need courage. Yes, sir.
I have 2 questions for you. What is this lapel about?
So this just stands for the fact that it's machine, it's handmade. But sir, that's not an account of standing for anything. I just bought it yesterday for this. Yes.
Good.
I have not been able to follow.
But I request you to move it when you go for the
I have not been able to follow what happened in Sri Lanka. Are you following it?
Yes, sir.
Can you educate us? At least me.
Absolutely.
So, to my limited understanding, sir, there are 3 salient events.
Yes, I have one more observation. You are always coming up with 3.
How do you come to 3? Why not 2?
So that's good also. Go ahead.
So, the current economic crisis in Sri Lanka could be again attributed to 3 factors. One, sir, a rush of Chinese currency into the Sri Lankan economy that has made the balance of payment a little tricky for them, sir. 2, sir, the COVID pandemic. They are a tourism-dependent economy, sir. So a lot of foreign dollars that were flowing in has stopped, sir. Third, sir, the president recently decided that their country should go organic, and that suddenly meant a sudden shift from fertilizers and a lot of expenses on own account, and that led to a sharp decline in agricultural production, leading to high inflation. So all in all, sir, we have a situation of high inflation.
But you see, that is all about the financial prudence and which the government has to take care. Everyone has gone through all these kind of things, and over-dependent on a particular, that also is exposed now. Yes, yes.
Because I saw the title somewhere.
What is CUTE, C-U-E-T? What does it mean, and how do you see its future? What is CUET? CUTE?
Sir, it's if I'm not wrong, sir, it's Central University Entrance Test.
Absolutely correct. But what do they want? Why is it required? How will it impact? All right, go through it. We don't have that much time to do it. I suggest that you go through. And AFFCA, let's say, what for that? Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Okay, all right. 7 states of East, Northeast.
Sir, Assam. Sorry, sir. So Sikkim. Then sir, the Nagaland, Manipur, and Mizoram. Tripura, Meghalaya. And Arunachal Pradesh.
अच्छा एक चीज बताओ अभी with all these things what is happening in India, the impact of now Russia used to be a very powerful ally, and most of these elements focused on the weapon system, we used to go from there. Now, with the background of Ukraine, would you say that how our over-dependence on Russia, what do you have to say about that?
So, our dependence on Russia is a legacy issue, sir. Most of our platforms are Russian. So all the three strike corps on the Western Front use Russian equipment still to this day, sir. In fact, so the new strike corps that we mounted in the mountains, sir, even that strike corps would be using Russian equipment, sir. Now, sir, when equipments are embedded to that level, it is difficult to suddenly turn away from that requirement, sir. But beyond the legacy issue also, sir, Russia has always been a dependable partner for transfer of high-end technology, even at critical junctures, sir. So, for example, when we needed S-400s for our defense against China, Russia was there, sir. However, sir, that is not to say that it's
So,
a government.
I have only one question at the end. You've written that you've been the editor of some magazine. I too have been the editor of a magazine in Army. And please tell me, what is the biggest challenge when you edit a magazine?
So I was the editor of my school magazine.
School
And that age, sir,
I see. But what was the biggest challenge you faced?
So getting genuine articles at that time. So almost everything was forged. So I had to return some articles saying that there's a simple Google search that leads to this. So getting it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, I would like to ask something about Haryana, that we are facing water table problem in Punjab, similar type of problem we will be facing in Haryana. The CM already said that we should change our cropping pattern, but because we don't have MSP on the other crops, what do you think as an administrator when you go into the services? What can you do? What can you suggest that the farmers will be benefited, and at the same point, environment, that is I would say at current time we should take note of environment, that is degrading. So what can be done to balance both of the points, both fronts?
As an administrator, my priority would be to ensure better implementation of policies already set in by the government. For example, now the government of Haryana has declared it a policy of ensuring that huge chunks of agricultural land in Haryana are shifted from rice-intensive agriculture to hardy crops such as ragi, bajra, jaw. This also comes with a substantial subsidy to farmers who decide to make the switch. So now, as an administrator, I would take a two-pronged approach. One, ensuring access and education with respect to those services, those schemes that farmers can avail, and provision of extension services. Research scientists should visit the fields, extension services. And two, ma'am, a general awareness campaign on the demerits of environment that lead to that this sort of cultivation pattern leads to. We are losing half a meter of groundwater table every year, and that is not a sustainable position to have. So now that would be my two-pronged approach.
Yes, if you are the SPM of Panchkula, and you are asked by the deputy minister to prepare a roadmap for the growth of Panchkula as a industrial hub, how will you go? What will you do?
So, to be an industrial center in any area, sir, there are certain prerequisites. So, for example, availability of water, which I think we can manage well. So, then there needs to be availability of sufficient cheap labor, relatively cheap labor, which again, sir, can be managed in anywhere in India right now, sir. So, then, sir, we need expertise.
Okay. Now, any feedback?
Well,
One